Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, everyone. Morning, Jonathan.
Good morning, Eliza.
How you doing?
I am good. How are you?
Doing well. Doing well. Can't complain.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. Hey, Ebony.
Good morning.
Good morning. I hope things with school have entered some sort of flow. I know that last week was pretty crazy for schools.
Yes, we won't slow down until about October. Please forgive me for having my camera off.
Oh,
My little one is homesick today, so I'm off today, but I want to be a part of this meeting. So I have my camera off. That's why.
no problem. We're glad that you're here, but please take care of your little one.
If it helps, Ebony, I remember when my kids were little and the pediatrician said, don't try and count how often your kids are sick. It's much easier to keep track of how often they are healthy, because little kids' entire job is getting sick to build an immune system.
Oh my goodness, Colin, it's been a lot. It's like every other month.
But if they don't do it, they don't build an immune system.
That's true. I've seen in the school system how children who've never been around other children, they miss like kindergarten, they miss 90 to 100 days of school because they're out so much because they're trying to build up your immune system.
Yep.
Yeah. In the
I got made
meantime,
fun of. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I got made fun of. I did an internship when I was doing my master's program at Children's National Medical Center, the hospital in DC, on the respiratory care floor. My entire master's program, I was sick with something. And the nurses on the floor were like, you haven't worked in a hospital, have you? I said, nope. And they said, don't worry, if you work here next year, you will never get sick again. And by golly, they've been, for the most part, pretty right. I get sick very, very, very rarely.
Wow.
Yeah, my first year at elementary school, I was a social worker at elementary school. And my first year, I was sick. I had pink eye, everything you could name, I had it. And I was like, this is ridiculous. So I understand.
Being around all those new germs.
Yeah. My mom, when I was little, would just let me eat dirt on the playground. And, and like there's a video of me like helping her butter chicken and like licking my fingers. And I'm like, Mom. She's like, well, you didn't get very sick growing up. And I was like, I did get sick when I was a teacher. That's when I started getting more sick, because every year I'd at least have one thing. But I don't know. My mom took the eat dirt approach, and apparently it worked when I was young.
Well, let me go outside and let her play in the dirt.
All right. I know Sharita said she would try to make it, but she wasn't. I talked to her late last night. Not late last night, but after normal business hours, about 6 or 7 last night, she and I were chatting. And she wasn't sure she'd be able to make it. Her daughter is still being taken care of and may have some testing or something today.
Okay.
But I think we've got a quorum, so we can
go
ahead and get started, Madam Chair.
Great. Let's get started. I'll call this meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Russ. We were just chatting about how we got sick or didn't get sick growing up, and just the season of small kids getting sick often. So
Yeah.
yeah, so we were just chatting about that before we got started. So hopefully you all saw the email that Colin sent out. He graciously spent some time with me yesterday, kind of putting this together. So we'll just move right into approving minutes. And I was right before the meeting trying to find the email I sent, because our August meeting happened in July. And so I sent the minutes, I believe, to everybody in early August, but had trouble finding that email. And I was going to try to tell you what date I sent it on.
I think
But
I can find it pretty quick.
Okay. And hopefully y'all have had time to review that. I was second guessing that I had sent the email. So I just wanted to make sure that y'all had received it. Thanks, Jonathan. All right. Do we have any edits to those minutes, or I'll take a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion.
August 9th. Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah, that is.
I'm not going crazy. Thank you. Do I have a second for the minutes?
I second.
Thanks, Ebony. Great. Well, we'll go ahead and move on to our third item. Let me drop this in the chat. That might be helpful just to have. That's the agenda that Colin sent for us. So our third item is discussion about exec meeting structure. So I just wanted to offer some thoughts about how we could set ourselves up well for these meetings that we'll have on Fridays. And so one thought I had was that we could I would send out an email on Mondays, the Monday before we have this exec meeting, offering space for people to bring forward agenda items, so that people would have a little bit of time to think about if there's something from their committee or otherwise that they'd want to elevate for us to discuss at this meeting. And then if those ideas, agenda items can get sent back to the whole group by Wednesday, then we'll be able to put together an agenda, and we'll just have to prioritize things that we absolutely have to talk about, but can, decide together what are the items we have time for and what can wait, of the things that are elevated by the group. So just throwing that out there as an idea, as a way to perhaps add a little structure and space for people to reflect on what could be helpful for us to talk about in these meetings beyond setting the agenda. And totally okay if there's months where there's nothing, but just want to elevate that space if it's helpful. Thoughts?
I think that makes good sense. And it made me wonder, is there somewhere where how are you as chair able to keep up with what's on there's another way to ask this. How are you as chair able to keep up with what's going on in the committees, other than the kind of every third month reports that we get from the committees, so that there's things that need to be flagged or pieces that, you think would be good for broader discussion or updates? Is that stuff held somewhere? Do you get those updates, or how does that work?
I am not sure. Colin may be able to share more of what that's looked like in the past. My understanding right now is just like when I'm able to attend a meeting in the past before I was chair, that I would be able to hear those things. Go ahead, Colin.
You got to remember, our executive committee is made up of the chair, vice chair, and secretary, as well as the chairs of the two subcommittees. So that's why Jonathan's here, and Sharita is on this committee. So that's kind of why all of us come together. So there's things that percolate at least once a month, Jonathan or Lloyd or Sharita or I would be able to sort of bring those to the executive committee, share those with Eliza, and perhaps through this new way that Eliza's suggesting would be another way of making sure things don't drop off the radar.
Yeah. That's certainly why I wanted to open up space. I would also say, like, it's on my mind to find time to be able to meet with folks offline, when, like, one, just to be able to get to know each other better, but also to offer space for those conversations, like if there are things that come up, and also just, there is space to reach out to me outside of the agenda items. I want people to feel comfortable doing that. Or if there's a particular meeting that's like, hey, this is a really important meeting, we expect to have good discussion, let me know, and I'm happy to attend if I'm able to. So I think hopefully we can figure out kind of what works, and through one of those channels, and particularly the agenda setting for exec meetings will help. But I also want people to feel comfortable, like if there's something that's helpful for me to potentially attend, or maybe Ebony to attend, like, please let me know, or Ebony, both of us know, and we'll do our best between us.
And I guess my only other piece with it was just kind of like mutual accountability and shared support. And I'm giving an example because I think we're already in a better place with this. But like in past years, October rolls around like the leaves begin to fall, and we suddenly have a conversation about, Colin knows what I'm going to say. We suddenly have a conversation about winter shelter as though we didn't know the snow was a coming.
Yeah.
And I know we've moved to a better place, but I think of both for Jonathan and Sharita, like there's so much. I mean, I'm always amazed when I read the reports of like what the committees have been done. And I was in planning policy for 2 years, so I remember. But with all those pieces, like how do we make sure we're supporting, like, oh, hey, has anyone thought, like, it's July? But again, I think we're in better shape. But just an example, has anyone looked at what the winter plan is so we can have the conversation before? Because it always leads us to this very emotionally driven conversation versus a data one when we end up doing it so late. And again, that's just an old example.
And you're absolutely right, Russ. Like, we are definitely in a better place for winter shelter this year than we have been in the last couple of years. Like, we actually have a plan, and the only thing that I think policy and planning is going to try and tackle on Monday is how to allocate the available rooms, if we want to prioritize some number of those to set aside for families, because there's not enough money to rent enough hotel rooms forever and ever in a day to house everybody in the winter. So it'll be a pretty small group through probably December, and we're working on getting money in a contract in place that'll start January 1st that will allow some greater flexibility and some different planning, and maybe looking at some different options going into the 2024 cold weather season.
So
we did jump ahead on that one, and you're absolutely right. There's a lot of things that try to do that forward planning is where we're trying to get to. And now that, we have a full team, which is nice. I don't want to say that too loud, but we've got a full team, and it'll at least give us a little more bandwidth. Does it mean that we still couldn't use another set of hands? Probably, but hey, 6 of us, 7 of us is better than 4.5, 5 of us had been.
So I think what might be also helpful, maybe that as an added layer to this, like on Monday, if you have agenda items, send them to us by Wednesday. Maybe there's maybe once or a couple times a year, we also ask like this question around bigger items, like what are the things that we know are coming, and how do we create some sort of calendar so that it's not Monday that we're thinking about, we need to talk about this Friday, but these are really big things that we know. And so maybe that is an added layer to this now, and maybe we check in again on it in 6 months. I'm not sure what that could look like. If y'all may already know, like, here are the things, and these are the things we need to plug in and talk about at these times that are similar to the example you gave, Russ. So just curious if that would be helpful to kind of building out a calendar. I could imagine some of those items would be really helpful as resources for the next chair. And I'm really interested in kind of setting those types of things up, so that it can be created and someone can just kind of say, okay, these are important conversations had at this time of the year, rather than feeling like some of that stuff sneaks up on us. Would that be helpful? Do y'all think like twice a year, quarterly, that should be asked? Or does it feel like one time and we could really nail down what those things are?
I think quarterly would be great.
Yeah. And I think setting aside the time to sort of map out how it flows through the year, because that might be an interesting piece to do for us and the committees, just to know, because you know, a lot of things are now floating in Jonathan and Sharita's head. And as they approach the half-decade mark of service as committee chairs, there's going to come a time when they're going to want to be done.
Right.
And so having that mapped out, so I mean, it was almost like getting the brain download, so there's more collective knowledge.
Yes.
Might be a good thing. And then that also helps us. I mean, because I mean, Jonathan, when you all get into doing all this work and reviewing, like, we need to know if there's something we need I'm just making this up, performance management to look at between March and September. We better have it on your schedule to be done in March. I'm just making that up because we know from then on, April to September, you're completely swamped. And so having that flow might be a good idea.
Speaking my language, I love trying to set people up for success. So, you know, and understanding of kind of what's already on people's plate, even if it's just in the scope of HSAC. Cool. Okay. So it sounds like it would be helpful for me to send a Monday email to the group and before this meeting, and then also quarterly send a broader question. And then there's also the secondary item around, maybe it would be helpful for us to have a conversation about the flow of those larger things that come up every year. So we'll start with the Monday piece, and then a kind of an all call of what are the pieces that reoccur that are essential and important to our committee work.
We could probably help at least put some of here are the things we know happen at certain time frames that are going to require some discussion, like setting priorities for ESG and COC. We know that's going to happen every late summer, early fall. So we could put that on a calendar to have those conversations earlier rather than, you know, waiting till the month before. We could help sort of bucket out, as Russ said, try and plan further out instead of the hurried rush, and sort of put some bones around to have this discussion. And here are the things that have historically been requested or needed, i.e. what data needs to be pulled. When does that data need to be pulled? What kind of comparison is that, to have a more intelligent conversation about it.
Okay. So Colin, do you and the community development team want to do that first, and then we send that out and have folks add to it? Or does it make sense for y'all to be working on that and we also ask this broader question?
I think we need to probably do both.
Okay.
Because it's easy for us to put things out, and then it essentially unintentionally puts blinders on other stuff people have in their minds. Like last night I was talking to Sharita, and she said, hey, one of the things we really need to look at from a system perspective is how are we able to help seniors in the homeless system? Because and her anecdotal evidence is she's seeing more and more seniors in the shelters, and the shelters have shifted to a 30-day stay. If you're working on your goals, it can be extended, but really get in, get out. And if you're a senior with, an amputee and a senior and other health issues, a 30-day stay in a shelter isn't going to get you very far. And it's something that we need to talk about. And Russ and I've talked to the VA about it, because we've got a good number of folks in there. And I pulled some data for the year that ended September 30th, 2022. And 8% of our homeless population was 65 or older.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go to 55 plus, it's
Wow.
27% of the homeless
Yes.
population is over 55.
We're seeing so much aging in supportive housing. It's incredible.
Mm-hmm. And it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. And Sharita said she thinks a lot of them are first-time homeless because they can't maintain properties, they can't pay the taxes. When I looked at our data in our system analysis, what's interesting is we have a pretty good number of first-time homeless, but it's first-time homeless in our system. And I'm not quite sure because some of the other data isn't lining up well. I think some of this is first-time homeless, but may have been homeless in other locations or severely at risk of homelessness in other places and migrated to Durham, which then made them homeless in Durham.
Well, so the funny fact, word here, I was at Carver Creek for the resident meeting yesterday for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Multiple people talked about how they'd had homes in town that they rented for 30 years and then they got sold and then they ended up either there or homeless or than there.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's a very, so to your point with this piece, we've done something with our leadership team where we created almost upcoming topics list that just runs on the bottom of the executive, like our leadership agenda, so that we start putting these in a place and start mapping out when are we going to get to it, if that makes sense. Because I think one of the things, now that you've got a larger team and more capacity, and a lot of times it would be like something hit and we had to like deal with it all of a sudden, even on these kind of topical pieces. So I think having some list where this stuff is collated, then we go, okay, when are we going to have capacity? And what's it going to take to have the conversation would be really good.
Yeah.
I think they call that a parking lot in other situations, but just something that rides and we keep knowing, okay, we got to come back and have this conversation.
And 51% of our homeless population is 25 to 54. So when you take 25 plus, that's 75% of the homeless population is 25 or older.
Yeah.
More like 78%.
Yeah. Well, those are really helpful contextual numbers. I think something that's been on my mind too is that the property tax assessment is happening. 25 is the year I believe it will be implemented. And so a part of that also thinking more broadly is, I know that the Coalition for Affordable Housing and Transit did some advocacy work and support, but we know the people that access the programs that the city now have are often people who have access to the information. And so I think that's definitely been on my mind as something that is going to be important across, many sectors of work. And I can see how it's very much connected to this work as well after hearing what you shared. Okay, well, it sounds like we have some great new ideas. It sounds like what we've agreed to is I'll send that Monday email before our meeting. I will also be sending, probably sooner than that Monday email, a follow-up kind of asking what are things that are happening every year that should be on this calendar. And at the same time, Colin will be working on that. And so hopefully we can marry those two things and at our next meeting, kind of follow up at least and share what that list looks like and then decide when we can or how we want to tackle it. And then there's also this idea about kind of having a parking lot list at the bottom of our exec agendas. That feel like it captures what we've talked about and what we feel like are good things to move forward with. All right, cool. Okay, so let's set the September agenda. Colin, I'll pass it off to you.
All right, let's make it a note real quick. Share my screen. What was that? Okay. We're in September. Make it a little bit bigger. So there's a note here, HSAC stipend, that was that from the August/July meeting?
I
that
think
I
we
missed?
talked about it in the June exec meeting.
And the distributing books.
That extra funds, right? That the
Yeah,
city
it's the extra
had to
funds.
use or lose.
Yeah, well, we spent the $1,000 that we received for last year. We bought books for the entire HSAC. Every member on the HSAC, we bought books. They're sitting in my office, and we wanted to distribute them to our HSAC members. And we wanted to talk to you all and see if the executive committee wanted to assist with distribution of books to HSAC members, or if you want that to come from staff. There's 20, I think we've got like 32 books, maybe 22, 29 members. So there's a couple extras for new members who come on. And I think that's why we put it on here, was just to kind of talk about it at this HSAC meeting. It's not something we need to necessarily bring up at the HSAC meeting, other than to let HSAC members know that we have books that we are going to be trying to coordinate delivery to them.
What book did we end up purchasing?
It was Housing First. Ending Homelessness, Transforming Systems, and Changing Lives. So it's a policy book and talking about challenges, best practices, what it means, what it looks like, things like that. So
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was just curious if there was like, you know, we can just pass out the books, or we can like offer, you know, do we want to have discussions throughout the year that are connected to the book? Do we want to just curious about the selection of the book, and if y'all had any ideas about how to tie that back in certain ways.
We as our team had not gotten that far. Sure. Because we were trying to, let's find a book that's relevant to what we do, that would help increase educational level of HSAC members about what it is that we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And figured if we got it ordered, then we could figure out what we want to do, whether or not we want to, I don't want to say, for lack of a better term, do a book club on it, or pick a few chapters that we think are most important and kind of highlight it as part of a training throughout the course of the year. Those are some just off the top of the head options that we could do.
Yeah.
I think we also talked about like there are several members on the HSAC who don't necessarily like work directly with the homeless population on a regular basis, and this book, you know, includes a lot of I guess like best practices or things that other systems have done to try to address homelessness. So to allow the full membership to kind of get a lot of that background information and also see some best practices and what the expectation for Housing First is, I think could give a lot of contextual knowledge to the larger conversations that we have as an HSAC.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds great. Are there thoughts from other folks about like how we could use this book? You know, book club may feel a bit daunting for folks, a big commitment, but I'm curious if I am exactly who you're talking about, Melissa. So it's like speaking my language that I'll be able to learn, but I'm curious if other folks have read the book already, or if exec committee wants to take a look at it and say, here's one chapter. Let's find a time to have a discussion this year on this chapter. And that could be a part of this like calendar, work. Or if, something is standing out. I just want to open up that space to see if people have thoughts about what feels helpful or that would spur a good conversation.
I definitely think that, I know like as a team for CDD, we've been talking a lot about policy updates, a lot of things that we'll have to go through HSAC forum updates and things like that. And, in the forefront of our mind should always be, are we housing first? And like, are the policies aligning with a housing first approach to addressing homelessness? And I think that that's something that's going to be important or how this book will be helpful for HSAC is, as we're doing these policy updates, as we're updating our governance charter, are we doing all of this with the mindset of housing first and following the best practices that, we can find like within this book specifically.
And I wonder if a few of us took a look at it. I mean, I think one, there'd be value in helping. So we're not going to give it to everybody who attends. This may actually be a healthy way of reinforcing, like, there's the HSAC membership, and then there's like the gallery, so to speak. So I think that could function in a good way. I also wonder if a few of us look together with you all at like what's in the book and what might make sense, especially with having so many new staff on the team. It really might be interesting, and Colin, shoot me down if I'm jumping ahead, but if different members of the team could have space in like HSAC meeting to like even facilitate a 15-minute conversation on like, okay, I'm making this up, the chapter of the month is X, and that would sort of help orient more of the HSAC to the whole team that you've got now. And so, I mean, people's capacity and time, and that may be the craziest thing you've ever heard, but integrating it every other month or whatever might not be a bad thing. I mean, most of us should be able to manage to read a chapter every other month, but I don't know some days. I say that while thinking there's a whole stack of books next to me that have been waiting for their chapter to be read for
Same. Ebony or Jonathan, thoughts?
Yeah, I personally like book club, but I also know that sometimes that can feel like homework for people. So, I just sort of was sitting here with a thought, wandering around in my head if there was any way to integrate whatever content we choose to work with from the book into the Jamboard stuff that you that the team did, because I seemed like people really engaged with that. And I don't know if that's the easiest way to have some sort of discussion, but it certainly seemed like a way that people enjoyed interacting. I know I certainly did. I don't know what that looks like, but that just was sort of, swirling in my head, wondering if there was a unique way we could do this that isn't traditional book club.
Okay, yeah. I love that connection.
I agree with everything that has been said.
Great. Always no pressure to say anything, but I always want to offer space. Okay, so does it feel helpful? Well, Colin, let me ask the question. Do we need to get these books to our HSAC members by a certain date? Is that a requirement? Okay.
No, we just had to spend the money by a certain date.
Got it.
And we have another $1,000 for this fiscal year that we can do something with, and not something we have to tackle in today's meeting, but just to put it on the radar as something for executive committee to think through, because we've got a lot more runway that we could do something other than just buying books, unless we feel that, hey, books is a really good option. And there might be there was another book that we liked I don't have the list in front of me, but there was another book that we actually thought would have been a better fit, but they were kind of out of print and was going to take too long to be able to get them done, or find them. So, we could look at a variety of things and what makes the most sense to and how best to use those funds.
So, Collins, is there a guideline to how you can spend the funding? Because I was thinking about maybe branding, I don't know, branding what we do. I don't know. I can only talk about during public schools, but one of the things that I did when I received extra funding is that I started, making flyers, and I put them in the hotels. I took them to the libraries so that people would know the type of services who may not necessarily know about entry point. But if you were to create like a QRC code or a flyer and put them in different places so that we would be able to capture who our homeless people are in the community. Just a thought.
Mm-hmm. I'd have to look and see if that's an eligible thing, because it's supposed to be spent on the committee or so I'd have to do a little digging. I mean, I think it's a great idea. And I know Russ and the street outreach team have done some branding on the street outreach cards.
Mm-hmm.
So I like what you're saying, and let me do some research on it and see if we can do something outside of the HSAC group. I know that we had talked at some point, there was a discussion about seeing if we could do it as a stipend for lived experience, but there's already a stipend in place for persons with lived experience.
Yeah. I also really like your idea, Ebony, and I thought about what the little cards that Russ has shared about. And I think what could be interesting is providing something for HSAC members to pass out to people they know in their circles about the work of the COC. And so kind of how do you, and like kind of like how are you sharing this with folks in the community? That could be interesting. Russ, did you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to say, I think part of the stipend thing may have come from, I was sitting in county commissioners meeting when they were approving the people who serve on commission get $50 a meeting unless they work for the county. Conversation. And I just didn't know, and apparently the city has something too. And I just didn't know how aware people were of that. But what also came up, I mean, I was there for something else different, so it was just kind of fascinating. They're really going to apparently be wanting to see more information and reporting, and maybe Melissa, this is already happening, on who's attending and who's not. And because they're going to, I guess, process checks on a quarterly basis. So, I mean, it was all new news to me. I'm on the county appointments side of things. And other than the welcome and I actually think I have some ethics training I was supposed to do earlier in the year. I need to go. But from the county, I just didn't know how aware people were of that. Heck, but would that help get some people to committee meetings if it was $50 a meeting? So yeah. So sorry, it was different than the book. Books are good.
Yeah, if they're appointed by the county though, and we'd have to.
But apparently there's a city stipend too, because they were talking. The chair kept saying this is to match the. They decided to do it to match the city, because at one point they were talking about being $100 a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they are more focusing on attendance records for everyone, both on the city.
I did get an email about this. So they do want, they're asking for regular reporting. It used to be just annual. Now they want it on a monthly basis. So they are looking at attendance more, which is good, because I think that's also a conversation that we've been having, like as an HSAC, and talking about how, how do we make sure that our committee members show up, because we've had several subcommittee meetings where, we weren't able to make votes or vote on certain items because we didn't have adequate attendance. So it's definitely going to be a conversation that is going to continue, and you'll probably be getting emails from me if you're an appointed member within the next month or so. I'm working with the coordinators for for county and city, because we're talking about attendance reporting now. So once we finalize like a plan and what that looks like on the back end, I'll be sharing with our appointed members.
Great, thank you. So it sounds like with the books, it sounds like it would be helpful for folks to be able to, on this committee, see the book and maybe talk about that at the next meeting, and then figure out what the plan is to pass it out. So it's on my radar to reach out to folks on the exec to meet. So what I could do is I could pick them up and drop them with Jonathan, Sharita, Ebony, and Russ myself. I'm happy to do that. And then yes, Melissa.
I was going to say, I know like Colin and I just briefly talked about this the other day, but I would love to pick your brains as an exec committee, because, you know, we do have the stipend for this year as well. And I've heard so many times in our meetings and in our subcommittee meetings that a lot of our membership would like to meet each other in person. So it is worth talking about if that's something that would be a good idea to spend our stipend on, not necessarily renting a place or anything like that, but maybe like public library, and we can, you know, use some of the stipend for like, you know, a couple of snacks or something for people to just meet each other. We could give out the books around the same time and kind of have a conversation if that's something that the exec committee thinks would be a good idea to get our membership in a room together. But yeah, I definitely think it's worth considering as an option. And I don't think we should use our whole stipend on that, but at least a portion on like a little bit of food. And then we could talk about the next book or what have you for the rest of the remaining part of the stipend.
Yeah, along those lines, I think that's a great idea. You know, I'm wondering if maybe something like an open house at, not volunteering, you guys, but but you know, the City of Durham, you know, as our COC lead agency. So not only do the HSAC members get to familiarize themselves with each other, but they also can also connect with all of the team members, particularly since there's new team members. But again, not volunteering the City of Durham's office.
No, we've got a decent conference room and some space, and Reginald likes to host things, so we can bring it up as a possible option.
We want some swag if we can.
What's that?
We need some swag, stickers, cups, pens.
Woohoo!
But it's an interesting idea to think about, because on some rotation, at least for I think, gosh, it's I haven't thought about. I think the more we can do to reinforce like who the HSAC members are versus the broader community is really important. And we really could start some occasional rotation, maybe quarterly, of like, hey, we're gonna do a visit to Carver Creek. We're gonna do a visit to the FMF shelter. We're gonna do a visit, D shelter. We're gonna go see what street outreach looks like. Just on some rotation, quarterly, whatever. Just have the invite out there so people are more.
It's a good idea, Russ.
Yeah, I like that idea as well.
Helps make
I have to say,
make
with
the work
our
more
group,
real.
Yeah, well, and we actually, with our agency, we moved to taking new board members. We actually took all the board members out about 6 months ago before a big planning retreat, out to see all the places we work. And a lot of people just hadn't seen it because of COVID and stuff. And so that's become a really good, and then we explain all the other parts of the system. And, you know, we could have a pretty good set way to do that with folks. Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, the only thing I would want to be careful with is that, you know, so many of the organizations that you've named are in receipt of funds through one or more of the competitions. And I just sort of also would wonder, well, I think we'd want to try to include as many organizations in this as possible.
Yes.
It doesn't look like, you know, a favorite.
I was thinking of people with conference rooms first.
Yes, well, and that's very like logical and spot on, because space.
But you're right, absolutely right.
Yeah. Like maybe we go. I mean, there may be some places that it's just not appropriate to go. You know, maybe the Durham Crisis Response Center. I'm, you know, there are a lot of sensitivity around there, but maybe we could do something where we're visiting, you know, as many of the projects in our COC, regardless of whether they're getting funding or not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great
Yeah.
ideas. So these are all ideas for the funding for this year. So what do next steps look like? Do we want to bring this back as a conversation in our next exec? Are there action items that need to happen in between?
I think we're going to need another discussion on it to make a decision. Could do a survey of the HSAC and see if they have ideas of what they think would be good, if we want to come up with like 2 or 3 options and put it out as a vote. I'm hesitant to just sort of put out a blank slate to the entire HSAC, because historically, if we do that, we don't really get much feedback. The group tends to do better if it's, here are 3 options, what do you think? And then here's a write-in if there's something you can think of that's not on this list.
Great. So it sounds like the action item is for our next exec. We need to come with some ideas, many of which I think were great today. We could just bring those back, offer people space to think a little bit more. And then at the next exec, we can make a decision on what those 2 to 3 options might be, and then offer those to the larger group. How does that sound?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So we'll just make sure that's on the agenda for our next meeting. Great. And then as for this year's book, does it still sound like the plan is for me to grab those from you, Colin? Is that all right?
Yeah, I can coordinate with you and we can figure out how to distribute them.
Okay, we'll work on that.
Yep.
Great. Okay, back to our agenda for September.
I believe we're going to need to approve our COC application at this meeting because it's due a couple days after our meeting. And the COC, the HSAC has to formally approve what we are submitting to HUD. And Lloyd and Jeff and Anthony and me and all of us are kind of working on writing the collaborative portion of this with getting input from COC members. So this should be wrapped up and be able to get it out to folks, and we can go through kind of an overview of, we could go through a highlights on it. By the time the whole thing's done, it's a couple 100-page document, and I'm not sure anybody is going to read the entire thing, but some of the areas of interest we could highlight and then have the motion to approve if that works. Thoughts? See, Eliza nodding your head.
Sounds good to me. When you were talking, I was curious how we're doing on the email vote that's supposed to be due today at 5. Curious about how that's been in. I did mine late last night, so.
Melissa is the scorekeeper on that one.
Yeah, we still need about 5 or 6 votes. Last I checked this morning, it was about 5 more votes to meet a quorum on that. So I will be sending a reminder right after this meeting, just so that we can get those final few votes. The same thing happened the last email vote. Like I sent the last email reminder that they had to the end of the day, and then we got those few votes in like maybe a couple minutes after. So some people might just need a little push.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're doing that.
I was talking to Sharita last night, and she said she had some confusion on the memo, and in the chart of the funding, it was hard to tell whether or not the way she was reading it, we were leaving money on the table, because where we get down to the DV bonus, there's not like an extra, here's where additional money is. It doesn't, the running tally doesn't keep going. And the unranked planning grant isn't on there to show that at the top it says funds available 2.3 million, and then at the bottom it kind of stops at 2,035,000. So it looks like there's $300,000 that's not accounted for somewhere that she noticed. So I walked her through it and sort of broke out the stuff to show how it all adds up. So we may want to when we send the next email, Jonathan, maybe I can talk to you after the meeting for a little bit and see if it makes sense to take that chart and add those 2 lines in the chart, just put it in the body of the email, just so people can say, here's the funding we're asking you to approve. This is sort of a slightly updated chart that's in the memo.
Absolutely.
But I didn't want to go do anything until I had talked to you and to Lloyd. I was just trying to help Sheree to understand.
It's always a challenge to communicate the rankings simply and concise, just because there are so many other things that go into it. So yeah, I certainly, nobody wants anyone to be confused or not have their questions answered. So whatever we need to do to provide an updated chart, of course I will do my part and help.
I made the changes just to visually show it to Sharita, so I can email it over to you in a moment. And if you're comfortable with it, I can just give that chart to Melissa, and she can drop it in the body of the email and say, this is an updated chart of what's in the memo. That way we don't have to go through re-signing the memo and all the other pieces. It's just sort of we're asking you to approve basically the 12 or 13 things that have dollar amounts, everything except for the ones that there's no funding. And it goes through here's what it adds up to. I'll send it to you. So we've got that, and then we'll put a share highlights. That could take 20 minutes, maybe 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how many highlights there are. There was one thing, we just shared some coordinated entry evaluation data because that had to go into our state application that got submitted. And I don't think we shared that coordinated entry with the full HSAC, and didn't know if that was something you all wanted to look at. That's kind of how many people were served through the homeless system. And it's comparing last year to this year. How many people came in, how many people went to rapid rehousing, how many people went to permanent supportive housing, and kind of looking at some of that data. And as Jeff and I were starting to dig into some of our COC application stuff, we started looking at some of the equity stuff, and we were blown away on some of the data that we were pulling and looking at in terms of exits and assistance in the homeless system. And exits were to permanent housing were within 1% of what the population is representative of the homeless population. So if 70% of the population is white, 70% of the people exiting to permanent housing were white. And if 28% of the population was African-American, Black, or identified as Black, 26.5 to 28% were exiting to permanent housing. It was really fascinating how almost spot on we are for a really equitable system, at least on our first glance, and something I think is really something we should be proud of, and the where we are with our equity stuff. So I don't know if you guys want to do any sharing or talking about what's happening in the system as a whole.
I have a question. I'm curious about this evaluation data. Is it paired up at all with the way we funded things between the 2 years? Like where our funds are going?
This doesn't talk specifically about it doesn't talk about dollars and cents. There's no money in this report. This is just straight up, here's how many people sought assistance. Here's kind of some breakdowns of different subpopulations, veterans, domestic violence, chronically homeless. Here's how many people exited to rapid, or here's how many new entries to rapid rehousing we have. Here's how many new entries we had to permanent supportive housing. And you'll see in some places there's drops, and that's related to amount of money and some of the other challenges that we've had with over the years. Some of our highest barrier of people, in order to get assistance, you had to be the highest barrier and the hardest to serve, which meant we served fewer people, and the cost per person was much higher and for a much longer period of time, which has then compressed the ability for a new slot to open because that group hasn't been able to move on as quickly.
Sure.
So it's the demographic, the data itself sort of can reflect the funding challenges, if that makes sense, even though the funding is not part of the report.
Yes. I guess I'm asking that question because I'm curious, like, it makes sense to me, the presentation to policy and planning. Curious, like, how would people see this being helpful for the exec? Like, what would be the purpose or context setting that would be helpful, just to make sure like it's connecting rather than just feeling like a presentation and then we don't think about it again. Like, how, I think that's what would be helpful for me to understand better, is how do we see this?
So to answer your question, I think when you look at this and you start seeing, really, you're used to seeing, 300 people were served in rapid rehousing. Well, out of that 300, only about, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but let's say it's 300. Well, only about 50 people new were served in that 300. So 250 people were helped the year before and they carried over, which gives you an idea of, if we're helping 300 people a year, you're only getting 50 new slots a year, and we've got 50 unsheltered singles and 50 unsheltered families. Well, no wonder we've got a backlog here. It's because there's no move on, there's no turning over. So it sort of helps you think through, okay, if we're going to be a homeless services advocacy group, it gives you the story to say, we need some more money in the system. We need more subsidies. We need more housing choice vouchers. We need something in order to turn this. Otherwise, the problem is going to stay the same. The numbers are going to stay the same. The challenges will remain the same, if not get worse, now that the fair market rents have raised almost 25% starting October 1st.
Is it possible? It's interesting. I mean, Eliza's question is a really good one, because it does feel a little bit at times like we get no conversation, we've got new numbers in front of us, and and there's not necessarily always context for it, if that makes sense. It's like, oh, families are up, or oh, singles are getting older. All very relevant, all very true. But and oftentimes we're seeing things even either isolated by which group it is, or we ran this report and here's what we saw in this moment. And I'm wondering, like, is this data that could become kind of the anchor data? Like, if Lloyd does a presentation in 5 months on pit count, I mean, I'm making it up, but not really, then something in what he's talking about is pointing back to, these are kind of our anchor numbers that we're looking at. So that, because I think sometimes, like, it's interesting when people have to interpret the numbers, and it's just always funny because I'm like, in other settings, not necessarily this, but in other settings, I'm like, it just all depends on who's looking at it and how they're feeling that day, whether they're telling me that line's, they're just telling me where the line is in the glass, or they're telling me it's half up or half down. But if we had an anchor set of numbers somewhere, and maybe this coordinated entry is like the highest set of numbers that's comprehensive.
So
I don't know if that's making any sense. My caffeine's wearing off.
It makes a lot of sense, Russ. And when you're looking for a set of anchor numbers, because each report reflects a different thing. So you can't say the coordinated entry report is your anchor numbers for the whole system on a system performance. So your system performance that goes to HUD is a totally separate anchor numbers. And your pit count is counted in a totally different way than the coordinated entry stuff is. So really you've got in the homeless system, because there are so many variables and there's so many moving pieces, you essentially have this coordinated entry evaluation that we are able to put some context between FY22 and FY23 and show, hey, what's happening in our system from a coordinated entry standpoint? How many people are coming in? How many people are going through these particular projects? And is that going up or down each year? And if we're seeing it go down, then that tells us something. Then your point in time count is kind of, this is how many people we counted on that particular day. Are we seeing a trend over time that on this January day, is this number going up, down, staying flat? Are there subpopulations that are fluctuating? And then you've got the system performance measures, which are our official scorecard to HUD, which talks about kind of how all these things come together and our overall success rate. How long, what is the average length of time people experience homelessness? What percentage of people are returning to homelessness in a period of time? What percentage of people are first-time homeless? There's those pieces. So you kind of really have 2 to 3 different data sets that I would say are your anchors.
Well, and it's interesting, and Eliza, shut me off talking too much, but this is really interesting to talk about because I'm thinking about, okay, like Duke Health System, like if they're trying to figure out what's going on with these problems, they have some kind of composite set of numbers that they're looking at on a big basis. And then they're going to break it down into segments, but they're going to have probably some, I say map, but I mean it like on a PowerPoint, like here's these sets of numbers, here's the main things we watch, here's what's going on. Because I think to Melissa's point, like with like performance management looking at it. So let's use supportive housing as an example. If we're trying to track like how are people doing getting jobs, and then you're like, well, a whole lot of people are 65 up. They're probably not going to go look for jobs. So how do you catch some of these different pieces in the data? But I mean, even having something that's like, these are our 3 sets of anchor numbers. Here's the things they tend to tell us. Here's when we're going to see them. And here's how they relate to each other. I mean, it's even an orientation for HSAC, because we do get the numbers based on kind of like the scoring thing we're dealing with now or the application we're dealing with now. But what's really the relationship?
Yeah, and that also I'm shaking my head. I totally agree. I feel like that's an advocacy tool too, of being able to say like, here's where we are. And then also I think will help us make decisions about our priorities better when we have a big picture look as well.
So maybe what we should do, if I'm hearing correctly, is it sounds like we've got several reports that are done on an annual basis. What I'm hearing is, how do we tie these 3 reports together? And how do we use those reports for the HSAC to make better data-informed decisions and do a training on HSAC on what reports are done on an annual basis, why they're done, and how they relate to help us move the needle forward? Is that relatively accurate? Or did I just confuse everything?
No, I think the last part about the training, I'm not sure. Like to me, it would almost be just a conversation about the 3, but maybe what's needed is a training about each one individually. I'm not sure about that part, but everything else I felt like made sense.
And I'm still a fan of like a simple PowerPoint that kind of, I mean, I used to deal with somebody who dealt with really complex financial stuff. And I loved every time he'd get our board together, he'd be like, let me orient you to the page. And so if he was highlighting something crazy from some like what was going on in one region, we still knew kind of what the anchor pieces were. And so he would relate it back to that. If it makes sense. So
I think we can do something along those lines of kind of not necessarily going through the nitty-gritty of each of those reports, but pulling the key points that tie together and give us a well-rounded, holistic snapshot of where we are and what's going on. And then obviously we can send all the reports as we do them, so people who are really into data are able to look and dive deeper into them if they wish.
So I think, just going back to our agenda, because I know technically this meeting goes to 11:30, but I know in the past it's ended at 11. I think it would be helpful to share this coordinated entry evaluation data. I think what might also be helpful as a primer to this discussion we're having is at the same time kind of naming these other data sets we've named here today and saying, here's other important things. Because kind of what we're doing by talking specifically about this one is almost like doing a training. It's like we're talking about the data we'll be talking about. So I think we can kind of set the stage for what we've talked about by, again, like showing that larger picture and then saying, here's the section we're talking about today. Melissa, sorry, your hand's been raised for a bit.
No worry. I was going to say, I've like heard this exact conversation every time we've done data reporting. And I think that a lot of people are not so much necessarily looking for a larger training on like all data, but having better context for, why were certain benchmarks chosen? Why are these things important at the beginning? And then at the end, going back and, all right, this is what our data has shown us in relation to, in correlation to those benchmarks that we set and some of that contextual knowledge that we said at the beginning of the presentation. And then also having a conversation as to what can we do as an HSAC to kind of improve these numbers, or are there things policy-wise that are hindering us from being able to hit certain benchmarks? Because I think that was definitely a conversation that we had during the project performance data. Like this time around, when we did the last set of project performance data, we did get some of our providers who submitted feedback for things that they saw, why shelter numbers were off, why stays were longer than they had expected. And I think having those conversations is even more so important than just the raw data. So I think I'm hearing that a lot, and I think it would be really nice to see that in practice as we report data in the future for HSAC, so that they get a lot more of that. Because I know we have those conversations like as staff whenever we talk about our data, and I think it would be nice if they see some of those conversations too, so that the reasoning makes more sense for why we make certain decisions.
That sounds great.
I can pull together kind of a report that sort of highlights, here are the data sets, very brief, orient the overview of what HUD considers and why the coordinated entry evaluation ties in and how it ties to that overall system performance data that HUD looks at. That's really, all of these things help us meet those system performance and those COC established benchmarks. And we can definitely by the numbers. Yes. Yes. So Russ, what are the numbers? Why are the numbers important? And what do the numbers actually tell us? Is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm agreeing. I mean, I think the other thing that's coming to mind is, I mean, it looks like I'm thinking of the advisory part that we have as a group. And you and I talked about, there probably needs to be a regular time where we show up after pit count at council and commission and be like, here's where we are. And I think if we can get this group to establish its anchor numbers and give it another name, that's fine. Just where my brain is today. we can more regularly report out to city and county. Because I mean, I think we're facing a lot of change, certainly on council. So we're going to have an education component ahead for ourselves to help people understand kind of what the needs are.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Okay.
We talk about affordable housing a lot. We don't talk about 0 to 30% AMI affordable housing a lot.
That is the big elephant
I
in the
would
room.
love to talk more about that.
Right. So to get through this, how long do you want to try and what's a fair, what do you want me to get it done in? I can try and make it as brief or as thorough as possible, but want to make sure people understand it. I don't want to be up there just la 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 la, and people are like, oh, that was good. I don't understand anything.
I mean, in policy and planning, how long did it take?
I think we got through it in about, well, we didn't do how it all connects to all these other pieces. So I think it took us maybe 15 minutes. I don't recall it taking that long.
Okay, so
It's about 15, 20 minutes, but I can.
So probably another 20 to 30 minutes.
So half hour, 45 minutes for presentation and discussion, questions. We could put 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think 45 feels like a lot, but we
I
could
agree with you.
see what we have.
I can, like I said, I can make it as short as possible. I want to meet the need. I don't want to make it. I'm a big fan of making things as simple and easy to follow.
Yeah.
And I can definitely get something done in 30 minutes or less so that there's time for discussion within that 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think simple is great. And, highlighting those important pieces as you're thinking about their connections across would be helpful, but great.
Yep,
It's not up here, but I know we emailed a little bit about this, but I was looking at some of like the rules that our public committees have, and one of them was that our committee members are technically supposed to be sharing some kind of contact information publicly on our website. So, I'm working with our admin team to update our HSAC page for our membership and just updating, positions and everything. And one of the things that was brought up was, are we going to add some kind of email? And I held off on actually doing it just because I know that some of our membership, they receive emails from us to what looks like a personal email, and I wouldn't feel comfortable sharing my personal email on the website. So I definitely didn't want to do that to any of our membership, but I definitely think it's a conversation we should have at some point with the full HSAC, because I definitely don't want to be out of compliance if they're supposed to have contact information shared publicly.
So do you imagine that just being something we bring up and then saying that staff would be in touch if your email looks like it's a personal email, or are you imagining that being a form that goes out?
I was thinking more of a form. I was thinking people might be more comfortable sharing their work email or, their work, phone number, even if they're comfortable sharing with that. However, I know some people wouldn't be, so I was just going to put a form out there and people could share the contact information that they feel most comfortable sharing. So that could be a work number or an email address. The guidance says that there needs to be contact information made available, but there is in anything specifically about it having to be an email or a phone number. It just needs to be some form of contact information shared.
Question, and I don't know the answer to this, so it's kind of a question for the group to think about. If somebody only has a personal email and they don't want to go set up another email, could we use the Durham Opening Doors email? So people would send it to us and we could forward it to particular members and sort of serve as that go-between. It's a contact.
It doesn't say we can't do that, so we could. But we we do need to have some form of contact information for each of our members. So if there are members who don't have an email outside of their personal email that they want to share, then we could do that as an option for those.
Could we, on the survey that goes out, could we just make that an option? I don't have a work email and I don't feel comfortable using my personal, please reach out to me. Just so that we don't have everybody trying to use the, like, you know, I would rather that be a secondary follow-up. And I think that then folks will be more inclined to pick their work email if they have one.
Yeah, and I think just as part of the like if you're being appointed by the city or county, you're divulging information anyway that's public record. So I mean, it's like we can make it that it's harder for somebody to find personal emails, but yeah, because I would hate for you all to have to deal with a lot of random emails coming in, but people do. I mean, I was noticing the other day when I was doing the attendance, how many people put like their personal Gmail accounts that are like even my colleagues. I think a lot of us just don't think about it when we're registering for something. So yeah. We may need to remind people because some of that becomes, I have to remember every time I have to put my cell phone and put my work phone, just remind people how public it is.
Yeah, good point. I was using my cell phone for a while because we were home, right? And so I was like, they're not going to recognize me if I don't put my cell in because I don't ever, use my work phone. Melissa, is that something that, like, if it's on our September agenda, will that survey be ready by then for us to talk about and say it would be, or is it something that it would be in the chat, or is it something that we would be sending later on in an email?
We could do it during the meeting. I feel like our HSAC is so much more responsive to surveys when we send it in meeting. So I'll have it ready by then. It's just going to be like a question with multiple options. So should
Perfect.
be hopefully simple enough for everyone.
Wonderful.
I guess we'll do the COC application highlights, approving minutes, coordinate entry evaluation data and how all these things tie together and why it's important, and a little discussion and explanation for the contact info for the website. That should fill out the meeting, unless there's something I'm missing. Anything else anyone can think of?
On my end.
All right. I think we are good
Great.
for an agenda.
Awesome.
Thank you, guys.
So we had 2 more items for today. How are folks feeling about staying till 11:30? Is that gonna work? Yeah, okay. Just wanted to check in. I know that's different than the past. I'm happy to like revisit what we feel comfortable with moving forward on timing for these meetings. So 2 items left: plan next steps for the information gathered through the Jamboard survey. So kind of what do we want to do with that? How do we want to move forward?
Don't
I'm so
recall.
sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so we did a Jamboard activity together. I think it was in May, yes, where we talked about the goals. And so we had all these little sticky notes and people kind of answered the questions. There was some discussion. Then there was also a survey that went out afterwards to capture anything from folks that whether they were in the meeting and they wanted to add more or they weren't able to attend. So we have that information and we're wondering what could we do with the next steps.
Got it.
I don't recall if we've actually seen the results yet, unless I might have happened while I was not at a meeting. So, I mean, obviously I was there participating, but I don't know what the sum of it is. which I would love to know. And then, maybe once I know what it is, then I could, maybe provide more suggestions, more concrete suggestions anyway.
Right.
We had the Jamboard, and then there was the survey afterwards. There's 2 data sets that need to be compiled. And I think that's where Eliza's trying to say, what and who is going to do the next steps of compiling and reporting out, and what are we going to do with it once we do get it compiled and reported out?
Yeah. And there was a question in the survey of who might be interested in supporting that work. And I think we had some folks. So I know that I have some of that data, but I don't have it since the survey closed. So it sounds like what we need to do is resend out, now that the survey is closed, anything that came in from the survey plus the Jamboard. And I think that if folks noted that they were interested in supporting next steps, we should certainly reach out to them and include them in some way. So it sounds like we can't really have this conversation until we get that. I would say, one thing that I've been thinking about is kind of how this might play into having further discussions, kind of like when we're thinking about our year again, like how might we be able to have more in-depth conversations of some of the things that came up. So that's something that I've just been thinking about, but I've not spent time. So Melissa, would you be able to share with us the finalized survey information and also the Jamboard one more time?
I think I did. So there were no updates after the survey closed. So I think I had emailed that it was all the same. So the survey responses were still just what they were the last time they were sent.
Okay. All right. Well, then I will look for that and resend it because it sounds like it'd be helpful to resend it. And share rest, no problem. And it sounds like we need to spend some time looking at that before moving forward. The last item is plan to update review governance document. And so this is something we had talked about with Helen, maybe in April or March. We had been talking about the governance document, but actually, like, I don't think we ever came back and looked at it together. We were kind of tasked with reading it on our own. So a part of what we were talking about earlier was our struggle in committee meetings to meet quorum, or, what does it look like to build a committee who's then able to have a different chair and not the same chair? What does bringing someone new on, and how do we support them in that? So I'm curious about the governance charter, and if particularly there are things that we can look at changing that would support us in kind of being able to meet quorum and kind of build up new leadership over time. So instead of reading the whole document, I'm curious if there are like particular sections that would be helpful. And I'm going to share my screen really quick. I was thinking if we could look at the Section 2 Governance Committee section and just read over if, we might come back with any ideas around changes that could help support our committee structures, kind of set us up for success in ways that would be helpful. And then I think it might also be helpful just to review the responsibilities of each committee. So Section 6, 7, and 8, just to make sure that those are functioning well, and if there's anything that needed to change there from those perspectives or be added or reconsidered, that there's opportunity to talk about that. So that was just the last thing I wanted to bring forward, is I felt like, are there things in our structure that could change that would support us in the way that we're functioning, and what might those things be, and how can we talk about them? So not really something to do today, but kind of potential homework to take with us to talk about next time.
Yeah, I definitely would love to talk further about this, because, certainly you and I have talked about ways that we can transition a new chair into performance management. And, certainly from my committee's perspective, I mean, the part of the problem we have with being able to vote sometimes, and usually the stuff that we're voting on is funding related, is that we just have conflicts of interest, and folks just can't vote, and rightfully so. So sometimes, something that a scoring committee will have done, may not even get a vote in performance management because we can't, and then we just forward it directly to HSAC for a direct vote. We have been through several secretaries who've agreed to step on, and then have moved or had a change in job, and I have reached out to one person in particular to see if that person might be interested in being successor, taking on the role. And I cannot get folks to respond, to want to volunteer and put forth the time. And I don't know if that's necessarily a structural thing or just I just don't have the time to do it. But I know I definitely, I'm certainly happy to continue as long as I can, but I definitely need some more support. And obviously in an ideal situation, like we do with our rotation, where, traditionally the secretary becomes the vice chair becomes, the president. We've excuse me, chair, not president, but we've got to have something similar to that in our subcommittees. And I mean, the other thing that has kind of been a concern for me is I had to miss a couple meetings earlier this summer, and thankfully I had somebody who was willing to step in, but certainly nobody can make every meeting, but I believe a committee deserves somebody who's going to be there most of the time. I don't like missing meetings. That's just me, because you miss out on what happens, but so forth. I definitely have some concerns here, and would love to see what we can do. I personally have been really happy to serve as chair, but committees need changes in leadership, and would love to find the person who would be next, appropriate next to step in and take over.
Yep. And you've done an excellent job, but I totally hear you. We really appreciate, the long tenure that you've had. But also it can, that also creates some hesitancy for someone to say, well, I don't want to take this for the next 5 years. Right. And so I think that can also be a barrier. It's like, I can do it for a year, but so it's a lot that you've taken on over multiple years. And so part of this too is just thinking through exactly what you're saying.
And I'm more than willing to support anybody who's like, so even when I'm not chair, I do plan to continue to be on the performance management committee, plan to be heavily involved. So I'm more than happy to help anybody who's remotely interested in doing this, support them. Even some of our members that are projects, even if one of them were willing to be chair and they could not chair a particular topic due to conflicts of interest, I mean, I could step in. There's lots of things we can do to make it easier. It's just finding folks who are willing to step up.
Great. Yeah, that's, really helpful context that you're sharing, and also like that you're offering support, that you're not going to just walk away. I think,
Oh, yeah.
I knew that about you, but I think that that is a part of what we have to share with somebody like that may be interested in stepping into the role. So I would like to continue this conversation in our next exec, and a part of that can be what Jonathan was sharing, and then a part of that can also be, can we imagine a way that our structure could look a little different that might support more engagement at our committee levels. And then some of that may be reaching out to folks on a one-on-one basis by exec or others, kind of to draw them in. Yeah, Ebony.
Question. Speaking of the committee meetings, Colin, do I still need to be a part of the policy meeting?
It's up to you. You can stay on that committee as well if you'd like. If you want to come off, let us know, and we'll see if we can refill that seat. It's your decision. You're welcome to stay on it.
Okay, I really like the policy meeting. Not to say that I'm going to get used to this. This is real work. Not to say that the policy meeting is not, but I think that's what my heart is. But I'm going to stay.
Good. No, I'm glad you're staying. I was like going to be really sad if you left, because you're the only connection we have to the school system, and you bring a valuable perspective that we miss without having you there. So thank you for willing to stay. And the way part of the governance issue we have is if an HSAC member drops off, it means we lose a COC liaison as well, potentially. And that's part of our problem is it's getting harder and harder to fill out committees, because if HSAC members aren't on the committees, it's hard to bring in additional people who can help do the work and give us the guidance that we need. And that was kind of what Eliza and I were talking about, is how can we help solve some of this? Our own governance kind of, we're putting roadblocks in front of ourselves for a committee by saying, basically 2/3 of the committee has to be made up of HSAC members. And, is that the right ratio, or is there another way to get, more people involved? And the logic I was told as to why that ratio was there was to ensure that the committees would not bring anything to the HSAC that the HSAC would not reasonably consider or approve. But I don't know that you need like a majority of the committee to be made up of HSAC members to ensure that a proposal that's brought forward has a reasonable success. And that's part of our job as the staff, to serve as that go-between and sort of flag, this may be a little too far outside the box for HSAC to take on. Let's think about it, or let's bring it as is, but expect this could happen. And there's ways to navigate and figure out what is the appropriate mix.
I agree. Go ahead, Melissa. You've got your hand up.
No worries. I was just gonna say, and I think that's one of the reasons why I do think a meeting in person would be really nice, because I think that finding more ways to engage with our HSAC is a great way. Like research shows that, engagement, like having, events and having committees come together, having membership come together, it leads to more, engagement from membership in meetings on a regular basis, because now they know the people that they're working with more, and they feel more comfortable sharing in meetings. They feel more comfortable commenting publicly. So I think if we can find more ways to engage our membership at different levels, it'll help, with some of those other pieces, like getting people to volunteer for committees or volunteer for positions, because I think some people may be worried about the workload or what goes on behind the scenes and how much work it takes. And I think allowing them to engage more often and more frequently and see that it's not necessarily a scary thing and it's very valuable, having more opportunities for that will be really good moving forward.
Along the lines of the structural thing, I had always presumed that sort of ratio between members and liaisons was more about ensuring representation, that that projects in the COC that, you know, either can't be members or just aren't would have some say. I will say, now that I think about this a little bit more, I think that structural issue limits participation in the performance management committee. I mean, naturally, we get a lot of projects, particularly those that are getting funding from one of the 3 competitions, who want to be on that committee, and rightfully so, because they, you know, they have a vested interest in that. So, you know, having that, you know, structural requirement there and a ratio requirement does, you know, limit participation.
Yeah. Well, we have, you know, time to think through what might feel like a better option, also weighing kind of conflicts of interest and what that could look like. And I think in our next meeting, we can discuss further, but I think lots of good discussion today. And thanks for bearing with me on a little bit longer meeting. But I felt like it was really fruitful, and I enjoyed hearing different ideas and perspectives. I felt like we got to better solutions or agenda items because of it. So if everyone feels good, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
I second.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Oh yeah, stay on. I will stay on.
Yeah, if you stay on for a second, I can share my screen and show you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We can talk it
Thanks,
through.
y'all.
Thanks all. Have a good one.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a good one. Now, where did I put this? I think this is it. Okay. So, can you see this, Jonathan?
I definitely can. Absolutely.
All right. So what I did is I just took the table 3 ranking.
Okay.
I just pulled that out of your memo and left everything as is, because the confusion came down here where it stopped at 11.
Yeah.
The way Sharita was reading was, she was saying this, she thought, well, up here you said there's $2,300,000. Well, where's the other 300? And I said, well, part of it is this domestic violence. And she's like, well, why isn't there number 12 here saying that should be funded? And why isn't the planning grant down here saying it should be funded? So all of these get added up, even though they're not ranked.
Yeah. Yeah. They're not in a ranking. They have their own little, I'm not in competition, but yeah.
Yeah. So they fall in there. So it's kind of like, you know, I could put in here like not ranked. And, you know, it was just sort of, she was trying to match up and say like, well, where's this other 300,000? Are we leaving it on the table? I'm like, no. It's here and here, because those don't get counted in this other bucket. And I was like, all right, I can. So I just said, here's how it adds up. Said, oh, okay. That makes sense now. I can follow the funding available, and then the table below, it shows how the running tally gets to this.
And it's also hard because some stuff doesn't get scored. Like we have a couple projects at the top that don't get scored. So like when we're talking about this, I'm trying to think, how is somebody who's never seen this or, you know, doesn't do this stuff going to understand it? And I'm sorry I didn't catch the number issue. I wish I had.
No. There's nothing to be sorry about, Jonathan. It made sense to me. But it's also, I understand the different pots and the things that are not ranked. And even though these aren't ranked, we're still kind of asking a committee to approve funding the unranked as well as the ranked.
Yeah. Because the bonus, we either get it or we don't. It's not it's not in tier 1, it's not in tier 2.
Yeah, the DV bonus is a totally separate pot that falls outside. And the the number 11 project is also kind of that we get it or we don't. It's not it's not baked into the cake that you're guaranteed that funding.
Tier 2.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it was just one of those things. I was like, all right, well, let me send it over and just run the math so she could see it. And granted, she was, she's been taking care of her daughter.
Absolutely.
So.
God bless her for having the time to,
Mm-hmm.
to spend and scrutinize this.
Yeah. So she said, I don't want to vote on it until I want to make sure I understand what it is. I said, all right, here, let me help you do it while I've got you on the phone and walk you through it. And she said, can we change that and send it out? I'm like, I'm not changing Jonathan's memo, but tomorrow I'll talk to Jonathan and Lloyd and we can maybe pull that chart out and send it out and just sort of, if that helped her to
absolutely
better visualization. If you're comfortable with it, I'll go ahead and work
absolutely
with Lisa to get it sent out and let Lloyd know as well, so we can finish the vote and put this baby to bed.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate you, my friend.
Anytime.
Take care of yourself. Talk soon.
All right. Happy Friday.
Yep, you too. Bye.
Bye.